Namaskara ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀರಾ and it's I'm sure very happy feeling and satisfying, ego satisfying thing for an author to see people don't even have seats to it's that spilling over. That's the love for Irrfan and the cinema, the book that you've written, Shubhra. Can't wait to get started. But here's a confession. I really feel like I'm a exam writing student. Just look at my apparatus. All the things that I've come ready with. And I actually went back to where I had left my bag because I had forgotten to get this. And because there's so much to read, so much to absorb, so much to share with you all. And it's also a feeling of, will I be able to do justice to a person who absolutely assuming that each one of us very, very deeply loves. And therefore, a book that you have tried to get people to speak about Irrfan, those who knew his work closely, like to really commend you on this. Can we please hear it for Shubhra Gupta? For those yet to buy it, this is the pustka. This is how it is. And it's got chapter after chapter of discovering somebody who you saw on screen and you wonder, why does he mean so much to us? This is a question even asked by the author herself, by the people who speak about him, who knew his cinema. But it's really a question I don't think we have the right answers for. If you have the mic already with you.
I have.
Yes, Shubhra. So when you set out to write this book, were you really expecting to find some answers, or were you really thinking that let's just know more about Irrfan? What was it that drove you to write this, and that too very close after his passing?
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much, Vasanthi, for doing this. And thank you all for coming. I mean, it's just such a pleasure to be talking about Irrfan. And to talk to him, talk about him in the past tense is something that still feels a bit surreal, because his work is alive, and and not just his work. I think the legacy that he left behind is something that we can actually see in like multiple actors right now, and I think his own DNA. I mean, you can see Babil Khan right now. He's done three things.
The Railwaymen,
and he's done Netflix, some kind of Party Night, that one. And the first one he did was Kala, which is also Netflix. You can actually see glimpses of his father, but I think he is setting out to be a very distinct actor on his own, and I see signs of that happening. But to go back to your question about what I was actually looking for, let me also confess something that I actually didn't really set out to write this book. I write, my life is bound by week-to-week film reviews. I write on cinema that comes into theaters, and I barely ever get a chance to draw my breath. So a book is such a formidably large thing that I always envy people who end up writing so many words, because mine is short to the point. It's about the film that I have just finished watching. A friend of ours got in touch with me and said, would I like to do a book on Irrfan? And I said, there's already a book that was out a few months before that. And that was a traditional biography of somebody whom I knew quite well, who's a friend of mine, who'd written that book. And I said, it already exists, so why should I go down this path? And then we had this conversation where the idea was, for a long-time film critic like me, who's seen everything he's done. I've seen work of his on television much before he started with film. To look at his through the prism of my practice of film criticism, as well as looking at someone who made a difference to mainstream Hindi cinema, what is now called Bollywood, because he was an outlier. He came from the outside, and he pushed his way into the center. And when he passed away so unfortunately, and so, I mean, it was really unfair that going. He was, I think, on the edge of something, on the cusp of something fantastic. It would have been, if he had been alive today, I think the Hindi movie industry would have been a different place. So when this friend got in touch with me, my publishers, I asked this one question. I said, film critics who don't write gossip and don't write about, who's having a little chakkar with so-and-so, who's going to be, buying this book? So Pan Mac actually said, let us worry about that. And I was like, now that sounds like something people I really want to work with. And that's how it started. And the reason why I decided to this format of conversations with people who have worked with him, his family, his friends, people in the industry, or people who haven't done movies with him but have known him very well, is to get a sense of him as a person and as not just as an actor, which was going to be from my prism to see him on screen. Has always been something that I'd done. And I wanted to get more of a complete picture of the man and, somebody whose vulnerabilities could be shared amongst us, because what we see is only one aspect.
Yeah.
Because this is an actor who actually brought his own craft to something, and he turned into that person. And it's very seldom that do we see actors actually doing this, pulling off becoming somebody else.
You see a film like Piku. I mean, if I were to really take a poll across the room and say, oh, what's your favorite Irrfan film? We can spend the next 45 minutes. It's just not enough. And we have so many of our favorites. But I am taking that film, which is also featured in your book as a conversation with Shujit Sarkar, is to say that is a film where you think that मतलब कोई धड़ाकेदार रोल नहीं है, मतलब ऐसा नहीं है कि it's a makbul where you want to, what intensity, what is that actor's craft. Here the actor is almost like one chilled out bystander. Like he just has to hang around. And in that, if you in that role of just watching one very quirky father-daughter jodi and still have that presence even while just standing there, that's Irrfan for you. And people who are describing what Irrfan was and speaking very closely, in fact, Shubhra mentioned about the conversational style. Those of you who have not read the book, without it being too much of a spoiler, I would like to just keep going back to the style of writing, also some of the things that are mentioned in the book. But it starts with this very achingly moving conversation that you have with Shutapa and his wife and Shailja Kejriwal, who knew him from his NSD days. We are absolutely treated to this young Irrfan who clearly the world didn't know about. Of course, after that, I think we saw him in Dharavahik Chanakya and this Star channel thing. But starting from that, from the spouse, going on to actor greats like Nasir, and also this thing, how did you choose the people who are finally going to make it? Like Mr. Shyam Benegal is featured here. I don't think we would normally link him and Irrfan. There are other directors who probably, Tigmanshu Dhulia, for instance. But then you have probably chosen in a certain way. Does that just keep happening, that people who are ready to speak about Irrfan as you kept getting to know them?
Okay, that's a good question. All I have to say is that there were people, if you ask me about my 10 favorite Irrfan movies, I would say 10. That's like too short a number. It has to maybe 20, maybe 30. So basically, my intention was to talk to people, as many people as I could, about Irrfan from the time he got into drama school. And then he started to move very clearly towards a particular, his purpose was to get into cinema. Television was a stopgap. It took him 10 years to get from getting out of drama school, that was 85. And then television happened to him because the movies that he was getting at that point were not great at all. So I also was very clear that unless I got an okay from Shutapa, I was not going to do this book.
Right.
Because when Mimi, my friend and who agented the book, reached out to me, it was only 2 months after he had passed away. It was very close to his passing. And I think the grief that we were feeling about Irfan's passing, though we did know that he was very seriously unwell and that there was very few chances of him actually dialing back from this very rare form of cancer that he was struggling with. I, knowing that Shutupa was his rock, and the fact that grief is something that I did not want to intrude upon, especially someone who has been his partner in professionally and personally.
Yeah.
I waited for her to get back to me. And then when she said, fine, I will speak to you, that's when I started to reach out to everyone else. And if you look at the book, you will see I've spoken to people who are, it's almost like a linear, this thing where his beginnings from Meera Nair with Salam Bombay.
Yeah.
And because that role, it was not a big role, but it was cut down to one scene. And when in the book, Meera talks about how he literally broke down. And she said, Irfan Saab, मैं आपको एक time ऐसा आएगा जब I will make it up to you. And then she gave him the namesake,
Yeah.
which is absolutely like one of the most fabulous films I think that I have seen in my long years of watching movies for the thing that I do. So there's Meera Nair, there's Shyam Benegal who took him for in Bharat Ek Khoj, which is a television serial which I still think is one of the best things that Doordarshan ever made. He had these bit roles. He was only on the periphery, but the eye went to Irfan. And then you went, and you're like, who's that guy? So when you start looking at him from there, and then you saw him in all the kind of the kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? The kind of melodramatic, loud television serials like Chanakya and all of that he started to get. He was trying very hard to move away from that zone, but it was not easy. Because at that time, when those movies were being made, the Khans were in formation. So Hindi cinema didn't really have a place for him. And I think it was the time when he rolled over into the new millennium and 2001 came, and Asif Kapadia, who is this UK-based director, offered him Warrior. I think if that Warrior hadn't come when it did, I think he would have just gone back.
He wouldn't have had an Irfan.
He wouldn't have had an Irfan. And then, of course, Tigmanshu came up with Hasil, and Vishal Bhardwaj made Maqbool, and that was it. I think Irfan was going to be... I don't think even he knew that his trajectory was going to be this, but everybody sat up, including people in the industry, sat up and said, who's that guy? It was up and then it was just us.
Yeah, and it wasn't just India asking who's that guy. There was Hollywood, there was international cinema who, as you mentioned, that he was India's first genuine crossover star. I want to start by reading the very first two lines of what Shubhra begins with, which is the introduction. Nahi karunga kahani puri, आधी छोड़ जाऊंगा बीच में. I will not complete the story. I will leave it halfway. Madari, I am getting as well. This was his line in Madari, which is 2016. And she goes on to say that Irfan gave us unalloyed joy, the kind only a true performer can. In his best roles, you could not see Irfan. What you got instead was a character, full-bodied, believable, built with the exquisite awareness of the self and the other. The fact that he took long to come into cinema as we know it, that is some explanation, as you were saying. And as Mr. Benegal also says, you know, the TV took up that sort of a time. But also, Shubhra, the actors that we now see, a whole galaxy, like Vicky Kaushal, like Rajkumar Rao, or whoever, I think there is a point you actually had that conversation with Vicky Kaushal. You were mentioning that they all probably are able to do what they are able to do because they had Irfan to look up to. And he made that path easier. It was how tough. We see him so naturally in his self, but how tough it may have been to actually stand up with conviction when the whole masala and the melodramatic was the mode.
You know,
so that struggle, if you can just capture.
Right. I think it was something that was really, really difficult because when he started, It was Om Puri and Nasiruddin Shah. Nasir was actually his guru, self-confessedly, many times over. And these two people and their work in Hindi cinema actually got Irrfan to where he was. And I think Irrfan paved the way for this entire galaxy of young or people who are established now. People like Ayushmann Khurrana, people like Rajkumar Rao, Jaideep Ahlawat, Vijay Verma. These are people who wouldn't have been given the kind of play that they have been by the film industry if it hadn't been for Irrfan. Because he just refused to go loud. For example, we are sitting here and I have a mic in my hand, but if I didn't, and if I were an actor, I would learn in my 4 years at the National School of Drama to throw my voice at the back, right? So that all of you people at the standing over there could hear me. But when you're doing a movie, your camera is literally like a feet away from you. You don't have to throw your voice. You have to unlearn what you learned in drama school and come and, that craft of an actor who works in cinema is completely different. I mean, they may be astoundingly talented, but the things that you have to do to be able to throw yourself at behind the 30 feet away on a screen is completely different. He learned that. He learned it slowly, but by the time he did, he was just waiting to explode. And I think 2001, when he did The Warrior, Hrithik Roshan did his first film. It was called Kal Ho Na Ho. It was called Kaho Na Pyar Hai.
Kaho Na Pyar Hai.
So Hrithik was supposed to be the star of the new millennium. It was the first time I think India Today had put a star on the cover.
Yes.
But, everyone said the new star, but he came from a film family and he was like a Greek god. Hrithik was, gorgeous looking. He was a dancer. None of these adjectives apply to Irrfan. I mean, I think Irrfan was very sexy. I think he was drop dead, like knock your socks off.
I can see the women in the audience.
Yeah, there was a lot of that I got when I was talking to people. But for a mainstream Bollywood producer or a director who were used to a certain kind of look, Irrfan didn't fit the bill at all.
Yeah.
He was also, I think, in his mid-30s when he was at that cusp. So he was not in his 20s. He had already crossed that. So there was no question of him, being comfortable with the kind of movies that were being made at that time.
Yeah.
Where, how can you imagine an Irrfan doing a Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, for example? But he did do one rom-com, He did one rom-com, which is, I forget, it was a terrible film. It had Juhi Chawla in it. And in one scene, I mean, it's a tropey scene in which he falls on her. It's like, and I could see, anybody can see how deeply uncomfortable he was doing that stuff. Okay, I said, ये नहीं कर सकता तो हिंदी movie में क्या?
वो rom-com पता नहीं, but comedy जरूर रहा होगा to actually have this.
No, I think that movie died, and it was good that it did, because
Thank God.
अगर वहाँ पर अगर hit हो जाती तो imagine क्या होता.
Good God.
I shudder to think.
Yeah. So all disaster was averted at the right time. But Irrfan, at the beginning of his journey, as an actor who's exploring his roles, didn't always get it right. By which I mean, and I refer to this chapter by Nasiruddin Shah. But Irrfan did have a peculiar savvy about how he wants to be perceived. I thought his performance in Makbool was excellent in the first half. In the second half, it wasn't that effective, and I told him so. And Irrfan said, yeah, that's my mistake. I tried to make the character a winner. I said, big mistake. Macbeth is by no means a winner. There is no way you can make Macbeth lovable. He's a bastard, and he deserves what he gets in the end. But the honesty and the sincerity with which he took Nasir Saab's feedback and must have, acted upon it. And then you see a sort of an arc of the other roles that he went on to play. There is so much. So at the end, I mean, that abrupt end, when he had already disrupted Hindi cinema and the mode that he was, what would we have got out of Irrfan, Shubhra? Like, what was coming? One regret, I'm sure, for the South Indian audience is that he never did a South, I mean, we never saw him in a South film.
he apparently, when he was during one of his periods when he was in remission, I think he was reading scripts till the end. That's what Chutupa told me when I had the chat with her. And even later, whenever I did, circle back to her, she said that he was getting very interesting work, and it was not like he would have become the fourth Khan. There already was a fourth Khan. People forget that Saif Ali Khan already existed.
And a Padma Shri at that.
And so he dropped the Khan from his surname. He said, I am Irrfan. And which is why when people ask, वो उसने क्यों किया? It was very, very clear. He didn't want to be in that, there was no comparison between those actors. And I'm not saying that Shah Rukh cannot act. When he wants to, he can. But Irrfan was a consummate actor. You put him anywhere and he would become...
They did share that frame in Billu Barber, didn't they?
They did. But Billu was supposed to be a film. Priyadarshan I have a chapter with Priyan in this, and it's one of the most fun chapters because Priyan is unfiltered. He says whatever comes to his head. And in that one, he says, एक शाहरुख के साथ मुझे एक picture करनी थी, वो बन नहीं रही थी. So this one came along and I said, Shahrukh, who should I take? He said, why not Irrfan? I said, okay, fine. Yeah. So I called up Irrfan. He said, हाँ, sir, बिल्कुल करना है, South की picture करना है. So, I think there was hunger in Irrfan to do the kind of roles. When people ask me, I asked this question to so many people. I asked them why he was looking towards Hollywood. Yeah. Was he not happy with people? I think even Karan Johar, for example, I asked Karan. I said, why didn't you think he's a great actor, you go on and on about it, why didn't you give him a role? So Karan he said, yes, you put me on the spot, but he did say he never had a role worthy of him. Yeah. And he also said...
And I think, I think that's true.
I think so, I mean, it is of course something that Karan would say. But also there was something to it. I think he's finally in this Rocky or Rani. He got Shabana Azmi to play something in it. So maybe his sensibilities are also... His sensibility, the sensibility of the Hindi movie, which was the kind of thing where a guy goes after a girl and said, yaar, tum mujhse pyar kyun nahi karti ho? Okay, from there to come to this and say, ki, acha, let's have a conversation about it. Yeah. I think Irrfan was very much part of that change.